Hi, my name's Daryl, and man, I've got a very exciting video for you today. Today, I'm going to be towing my A-liner camper with my RAV4 Prime. Now, we do a lot of towing of our A-liner camper and our RAV4 Prime. Me and my wife were both retired, so we do a lot of traveling to national parks. But I've always wondered, how much stress I'm putting my RAV4 Prime under, especially when I'm, going up a large grade on a mountain pass. So today we're gonna find that out. So I recently got a scanner for my RAV4 Prime, and it's one specifically for Toyota. It's a KingBolen scanner, and it's called the Solo Scan, and it's made specifically for Toyota vehicles, so it gets kind of a lot of the information that generic scanners just can't get. So what I'm gonna be looking at when I'm doing my towing test is the coolant temperature, the reactor temperature, the motor temperature, both in the front and rear motors, as well as the motor generator temperature. So I think with all of that, I should get a really good idea on how hard our RAV4 Prime's working. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do an initial test, kind of like as a baseline without towing anything. I'm gonna go about 25 miles or so. It's up a relatively steep grade here in Las Vegas, going up the Spring Mountains. And I'm going to kind of record the temperatures right before we start the large grade. Then I'm gonna record the temperature also kind of in the middle of the grade. And finally, once we're all the way to the top, I'm gonna look at the temperatures again. Then I'm gonna come back, I'm gonna hitch up, and then we're gonna do the test again, towing our A-liner camper. It probably weighs right now about 2,300 pounds. So it's pretty close to that 2,500 pound towing capacity that you can do in your RAV4 Prime. So yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun just to know that. Now, after I'm done with both of the tests, then we're gonna come back, I'll put all the numbers in a spreadsheet, and then we'll analyze. So yeah, get ready for a really exciting drive, and let's get started. For this test, we're gonna run it in hybrid mode in just normal. And I've got about, 14 miles of EV range. And so I do want a little bit of battery. Typically, if you're on a long trip, you're always gonna have it in hybrid mode, and you always want some battery just so that I can use the motors when it really needs to, when, when you're passing or when you're towing. So that's how we're gonna be doing the test. Now, I did reset the gas mileage just for shits and giggles. I've done a number of gas mileage tests with the RAV4 Prime, just in regular and then also with towing, but we'll go ahead and do that just to get that out of the way again. I'll see you in about 10 miles or so. All right, you guys, so we're pretty much at our warm-up spot here, and we've climbed a little bit, but not a lot, but basically the coolant temperature, so here's the numbers right here, and I'll put them on the screen. The coolant temperature is 197 degrees. The motor temperature for the front motor is 129, and the generator temperature is 122. Looks like the rear motors, of course, they're not really getting used at all. So that's what we're at right now. We're gonna start our serious climbing now, so we should see those numbers climb. And when I get about halfway, we'll check those temperatures again. One thing I forgot to mention, I'm gonna use the cruise control. So the speed limit here is 65 miles per hour. And so I'm gonna set the cruise control for 70 miles per hour. And I'm gonna do that for without towing, and I'm also gonna do it when I am towing, just to keep it consistent. All right, so this is when we really start to feel some grade here. So right now we're running at 3,360 RPMs. Coolant temperature still exactly the same, 199 degrees. The motor temperature though, and the generator temperature has gone up. So it's gone up to 136 degrees. So even though the engine temperature stayed the same, both the motor temperatures went up. We're probably about 3 or 4 miles away from the top of the hill. We are keeping a consistent 70 miles per hour, but the speed limit has just changed to 45 miles an hour, so I do gotta slow down. We are kind of still going up a pretty good grade, so you're gonna hear those RPMs climb, and we're getting, I think, relatively close to the summit here. My gas mileage, I was at 28 miles per gallon. It dropped pretty significantly down to 21 miles per gallon with this grade. Yeah, so our final numbers right here, we ended up with 203 degrees for the coolant at the top of the hill, 154 degrees for the motor temperature, and 143 degrees for the generator temperature. And the rear motor actually, it kicked in, so it went at 111 degrees. So just to wrap up the first test, we ended up with 39.1 miles per gallon. So you gotta love the RAV4 Prime. We are not gonna get that when we're towing. I would expect the best we're gonna get is 25 miles per gallon. So these were the numbers that we ended up with at the end of the trip. So we ended up with 176 degrees on the coolant. Interestingly enough, the motor temperatures and the generator temperatures went up quite a bit. And I think that really had to do with the fact that we were going downhill a lot, and we were actually using the electric motors a little bit more than the engine. So we were in EV mode just a little bit more. Yeah, I don't know if we really have to worry much about the electric motors, but we'll see when we're towing. We'll see if they, you know, go sky high or not. So yeah, let's go ahead and get hitched up and do the next test. All right, guys, so you're probably gonna notice I got a little wardrobe change here. So I started off with towing yesterday, but I think because I drove it back, the motor temperature as well as the generator temperature was a little high. And so I really didn't want to start the second test on towing with those temperatures already high. So I decided to delay the second test until the following day. So now it's the following day, same time. We have the same temperatures going on. So 154 on the coolant, 125 for the motor temperature and the generator temperature. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll check in at the warm-up point. I think we were at like 129 degrees on the motor temperature without towing at this point, and now we're at 176. So yeah, pretty significant change. And the generator temperature is 154, and I think that was 129 before. The coolant temperature really hasn't done anything different. I think it was about 195 degrees before, now it's 197. So really interesting. It does seem like towing has a significant impact on the motor temperatures on the drivetrain. So what's too high? I don't know. But we're gonna see how high we can get it. Okay. All right. I figured this would be a good time to check in. So we're at 5,600 RPMs on the engine speed. Motor is still staying really cool. 199 degrees. 176 though for the motor. And 172 for the generator. So yeah, they're working really hard. Seems like the you know, the electric motors are kicking in, but they're heating up. So yeah, we're gonna get to the top of the hill, and then we'll take the final readings, and then we'll go from there. We got it up to 208 degrees on the coolant, 190 on the motor temperature, and 186 on the generator temperature. So significant change. Now I just don't know. I'm gonna have to do some research. So hopefully I can find out, you know, kind of where, what the maximum on the motor temperature and the generator temperature would be. So that would be really interesting to know. Yeah, so just one more thing, the motor temperature and the generator temperature did rise just a little bit more. So it's at 208 and 204 degrees right now. So I'd imagine it just, yeah, after that big run, it just kind of maybe a little bit of a heat sink. I don't know. So yeah, we'll be back in a second. All right, so these were our final numbers, 23.4 miles per gallon. So yeah, a lot less than the 39.1. And we ended up with a coolant temperature of 183, a motor temperature of 201, and a generator temperature of 161. So, you know, it stayed pretty hot the whole way home. And if you remember in the first test, it actually got hotter on the way home because it really wasn't using the engine very much because it was kind of downhill. So it relied more on the electric motors. So very interesting. So I'm going to do a little research and then I'll be back in a second. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap this video up. Now, before I get into the stats, let's first talk about the route I took for this towing test. Now, I did talk about I was going up a mountain and it was pretty steep of a grade, but this is the map of where I went. So this is a little turnoff to go to Red Rock Canyon here in Las Vegas, and it's basically about 10 miles, and it goes to this Mountain Springs summit. Now this summit is 5,700 feet, and where we started was right around 2,700 feet. So you gain about 3,000 feet in 10 miles, which is pretty significant. Also, the biggest gradient or grade was 7.5%. Now I think that's pretty close to the maximum grade that you can have on kind of highways, but nevertheless, it's pretty steep. Now, this is actually pretty similar to the Davis Dam test. So if you don't know what that is, kind of put a little link to it right here. This is a test that manufacturers have to go through when they're getting their towing certification. So this talks all about the Davis Dam test, and it's kind of really, it's outside of Las Vegas. It's right next to Laughlin, Nevada. I've actually traveled this route quite a bit. And it goes from about 0 feet to 3,500 feet, and it does so in about 11.5 miles. So what we did here was actually pretty close to the Davis Dam test. Now, typically, in order to do this test, you have to do it when it's over 100 degrees when you start the test. Now, we weren't over 100 degrees, so obviously we didn't do the Davis Dam test, but it was still a pretty strenuous test. So let's go ahead and let's also talk about, before we get into the stats, let's talk about how I think the RAV4 Prime did. So as far as towing goes, it's got plenty of power. So as I'd mentioned, I put it on cruise control, which you're really not actually supposed to do when you're towing, but I just wanted to keep it consistent. I was going 70 miles per hour and it had no problem keeping that pace. In fact, you know, I was flying by semis that were going up the same mountain grade pass. So power is no problem. It is a unibody car as opposed to a body on frame car. So you will feel the vibration. So whenever you go over a little bump and that trailer and the hitch kind of move a little bit, you're definitely gonna feel that in the RAV4. But that's just what you're gonna get with a unibody vehicle. It was loud, yeah, so, you know, we had RPMs of over 5,500. So, you know, the combination of the 4-cylinder engine and that CVT kind of droning, it wasn't great. Doesn't sound great, but, you know, it's only when you're doing a mountain pass. Typically, if you're just steady state driving, going 65, 70 miles per hour, really it's no problem. Now, I did feel the bumps, but I never had any sort of sway. I mean, the RAV4 Prime is actually a pretty heavy vehicle. I think it tips the scales at about 4,500 pounds, and so I think it handled the trailer pretty well. And the fact that my trailer had a relatively small frontal body area, so it wasn't a big, tall trailer. It was kind of a small trailer, so, you know, it was more like a pop-up trailer, so it didn't have any problems. So now that we got, oh, and the other thing is the gas mileage. So you might be a little disappointed. You're like, man, that thing got 39 miles per gallon, but then when you towed, it went down to 23.5 miles per gallon, basically. But that's just what you're going to get, especially with a 4-cylinder engine that's really, you know, it's very aerodynamic. So they get their really good gas mileage by the fact that it's a 4-cylinder. It's using the hybrid motors, and it regenerates that power when you brake. And it's a suit, and it also has a low rolling resistance on the tires. But you put that big trailer in the back of it, even though it's a smaller pop-up trailer, and that frontal area, it's going to affect because the wind hits it. So your gas mileage will go down significantly. And so that's basically just normal for any 4-cylinder vehicle. You're going to, you know, when you tow, you're going to get a big hit on your gas mileage. All right, so now let's go ahead and look at the stats and the data for this test. So I put everything into an Excel spreadsheet. What I found was there really wasn't any significant difference when towing in regards to, you know, the engine coolant or the temperature of the engine or the engine oil. It stayed pretty consistent. So between it when it was warming up, 197 to 197, halfway up the hill, 199 to 199, at the summit, 203 to 208. And the engine oil at the top of the summit, I think there was only like 4 or 5 degrees in difference between towing and not towing. So that 4-cylinder, that 2.4 liter 4-cylinder engine made by Toyota is a super engine, super solid. You know, I'm not going to have any concerns about the engine. Now, when you're looking at the electric motors and the motor generator unit, that's where things change a little bit. So once I was warmed up, the motor went from 129 degrees when I wasn't towing to 176 degrees. Halfway up the hill, it went from 136 degrees to 176 degrees when I was towing. So 40 degrees difference in temperature. At the summit, it went from 154 degrees to 190 degrees. So yeah, another difference of 36 degrees. The other one was 40 degrees difference. The other thing I found was when I was actually done towing and when it was just sitting there, it seemed like the temperatures continued to increase. And so when I turned it back on again, my little scanner gauge, I saw temperatures of 208 degrees on the motor. And that was just right after I did the towing test. And so it seems like it was climbing a little bit, perhaps a little bit of heat sink, or, you know, it couldn't quite dissipate the heat. It continued to warm up. And then after I started driving, then the temperatures went down quite a bit. So I was a little concerned. I'm not going to lie, I was a little concerned. I was like, I didn't expect to see that much of a difference between, because I assumed kind of when you're using the hybrid, mostly I thought it was mostly using the engine when you're towing. I didn't know it was actually using those electric motors quite that much. And obviously it is using those electric motors. So that's when I decided to do some research. So the first thing, of course, I did is I just did a Google search for it. So I typed into Google, you know, I typed in on electric motors and automobiles, what is, you know, a normal temperature and what's a max temperature. And yeah, it said, this is what really scared me. It said it's recommended to keep them below 180 degrees. So I was like, oh, I'm well over 180 degrees here. So I'm at 208. So I figured I'd do a little bit more research. So I looked at some forums and posted some questions in the RAV4 Prime Facebook group, as well as the RAV4 world. Didn't get necessarily any answers from those groups, although they were trying to be helpful. What I did find, though, is I found a test. So Alex on Autos, he's a pretty famous YouTuber, and he tested a RAV4 hybrid, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, and he did a towing test with the RAV4 hybrid. Now, he did what you shouldn't do, is he towed overweight. So the RAV4 hybrid, its maximum towing capacity is 1,750 pounds, and he towed 2,000 pounds. He towed it all the way up Donner Pass, which is this crazy grade, and he kind of did it with more of a kind of a cargo trailer that had a lot more frontal area than my pop-up camper or my A-frame camper. So yeah, that was a real interesting test that he did. And his results from the test is when he was doing sustained climbing up the hill, he had his motor generator unit 1, he had that at a max of 234 degrees. His motor generator 2, he had 238 degrees. So if you compare that to the numbers that I got, the max numbers that I got was 208 degrees versus 238 degrees. I think that makes me feel a lot better about towing with the RAV4 Prime. Now, I can only assume that the motor units, the motors and the motor generator units in the RAV4 hybrid, in the RAV4 Prime, would be relatively similar. I think the horsepower in the motors is actually pretty much the same. It just, you get the extra horsepower out of the motor units because of the larger battery that's in the RAV4 Prime. So I would have to believe, because the RAV4 Prime, you can use that, of course you can just use it in EV mode, and they don't say you can't tow just in EV mode. So I would assume towing in hybrid mode, it's going to keep those temperatures within a sustainable level, as opposed to just towing just in EV mode. So I'm going to come to the conclusion that I think I was fine in towing with my RAV4 Prime. Now I will say that if you plan on doing a lot of towing, so we do, we take a trip probably once a month, I probably really should have some other dedicated towing vehicle, whether that would be, a pickup truck made by Toyota, maybe a Toyota Tacoma, a Toyota Tundra, or even, well, probably not a Highlander, but one of their body-on-frame vehicles is probably what I should consider investing in. So I will probably do that and give the RAV4 Prime just a little bit of break so it can focus on more on kind of the city and around town driving. But nevertheless, I think you're okay. If you're just doing occasional towing duties with your RAV4 Prime, up to that probably 2,500 pound level, you'd probably be pretty much okay. It's nice about the RAV4 Prime, you got all that extra horsepower from those electric motors, and it seems like they handle that weight just fine. So I hope you learned something from this video. If I do get any answers from Toyota, and I also emailed kind of this famous Toyota tech, he's I think they call him the Total Car Care Net, something like that. I asked him a question about this as well. If I do get any answers from those folks or any other significant information, I will put that information in the description of this video. So hopefully you will see that. But this is Daryl, and I really enjoyed doing this for you, and I hope to see you in the next video very soon.